My daughter sent a text message to her friends, mocking me for the way I dressed and how I'd always tried to keep us close. The moment I saw it, I realized she didn't need me anymore. So I stopped trying to be the father she didn't want and let her find her own path. What happened next was just unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Cecilia Keene from Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I was never a man of great ambition, at least not in the ways the world measures success. I worked quietly in a small accounting firm, taking satisfaction in balancing other people's books, as if by keeping their lives in order I could steady my own. My name is Thomas, though it doesn't matter much anymore. I think of it more as a placeholder for everything I gave up and everything I once hoped I might become. There were nights, years ago, when I lay awake wondering what it would be like to pursue the dreams I'd sketched in the margins of my college notebooks. Traveling somewhere new, maybe even writing a book. But those dreams evaporated the moment I held my daughter in my arms for the first time. Her tiny fingers, the faint scent of baby lotion clinging to her skin, and the tremor in my chest when I whispered her name, it was all I needed to know that the man I'd been was gone. I became her father in that moment, and I wore that role like a second skin. I thought, back then, that being a father meant being a constant, unyielding presence. I would be the one she could always depend on, the quiet anchor in her churning world. I didn't mind the little sacrifices, nights spent fixing leaky faucets instead of going out with friends, the endless hours in cramped auditoriums for her school plays, even when she forgot her lines and burst into tears. I was there for her, even when she didn't notice me at all. I suppose I believed that devotion would build an unbreakable bond between us, a kind of silent pact that would hold through the lean years and the bright ones. But as she grew older, I saw the shift in her eyes. She pulled away from me in small ways, brushing off my attempts at conversation with a curt nod or a distracted smile. I told myself it was normal, that every child needed space. I didn't want to be the kind of father who clung too tightly, so I learned to let her go inch by inch, even when it felt like she was slipping through my fingers. I told myself she would come back. I didn't realize, not really, that she never intended to. It was a Tuesday evening when I found the messages. My daughter had left her phone on the kitchen table, and while I've never been one to pry, something compelled me to glance at the screen. Maybe it was the way she had smiled at me earlier, a smile that felt more like a performance than anything genuine. Or maybe it was just the weight of all those years of giving without asking for anything in return. My eyes fell on the words she had typed to her friends, each letter a slow knife to the heart. "He's so clueless," she'd written. "He dresses like he's stuck in the 90s, still clinging to those ugly old shoes." Another message, "I wish he'd just back off. He's so embarrassing." I remember standing there, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter so tightly I thought it might crack. My chest felt hollow, as if every breath had been stolen. I read the words again and again, trying to find a trace of the girl I'd known, the one who used to press her face into my shoulder and whisper that she loved me. But there was nothing there, just a stranger in her place, a stranger who wore my daughter's face and laughed at the man who had built his life around her. For a moment, I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, to beg her to see me the way she once had. But the urge passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a quiet resolve that surprised me. She didn't need me anymore, not really. She didn't want the man I had become for her sake. And if that was true, if she saw me as little more than a relic of the past, I would let her see what life looked like without my constant presence. I didn't say a word to her that night. I simply handed her the phone when she came back into the kitchen, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. She thanked me with a distracted smile, her eyes already elsewhere. And in that moment, something shifted inside me, something deep and final. I realized that the greatest betrayal wasn't her laughter at my expense or her careless words. It was the realization that she never saw the man behind the father. She never knew the quiet weight I carried in every choice I made for her. And if she was so determined to walk away, I would not stand in her way. I decided, then and there, that I would stop trying to be the father she didn't want. I would let her find her own path, even if it meant leaving me behind. It was a small death, but it was also a kind of rebirth. I didn't know it at the time, but that choice was the first step on the road to something I never imagined, my own quiet revenge. I kept my promise to myself after that night. I didn't try to change her mind, didn't beg for her affection, didn't demand that she remember who I was to her. It was a curious sort of relief, really, to step back and watch the pieces of my life reassemble themselves without her in the center. I went through the motions of my days like a man who had just woken up from a long, uneasy sleep. I started to notice how the early morning light filtered through the kitchen window, painting everything in gentle gold. I took longer walks after work, no longer rushing home to make sure she had dinner waiting. I even found myself reading the paper again, the rustle of the pages oddly comforting in its simplicity. Small things, but they felt like mine for the first time in years. She didn't notice my absence at first. I'd always been the background noise of her life, there, but never demanding to be seen. So when I stopped offering unsolicited advice, when I let her make her own plans without asking if she needed money or a ride, she seemed almost relieved. She floated through those first weeks, carried by the careless certainty that I would always be there, that my silence was just another form of love. I saw it in the way she came and went without a word, in the small, bright flashes of annoyance that crossed her face when she realized I wasn't paying attention to her the way I once had. I didn't stop caring. That's the part one want you to understand. My love for her didn't vanish overnight, like a coat I could shrug off. It was still there, deep in my bones, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the desperate, grasping love of a man who thought he might lose her if he didn't try hard enough. Instead, it was a quiet, watchful thing, an ember that burned steadily, no longer willing to be snuffed out by her indifference. Sometimes, late at night, I found myself standing in the doorway of her room, listening to the soft rhythm of her breath as she slept. She looked so small in those moments, so fragile and unguarded, and for a moment I would feel that old ache, that need to protect her from everything, including herself. But then I would remember the words she had typed to her friends, the casual cruelty in them, and I would turn away. She didn't want my protection. She wanted me gone, even if she didn't know it yet. I began to see her differently, too. I noticed how quickly she latched on to new people, friends she met at college who flattered her and made her feel seen in ways I never could. She clung to their approval the way she used to cling to mine, but I could see how shallow those connections were. I watched her pour herself into these friendships, giving pieces of herself away for the promise of belonging, and I realized she was still searching for something she couldn't name. She didn't see the danger in it, didn't see how easily those bright, eager friends would vanish the moment she faltered. There was a small, cold satisfaction in that realization, not because I wanted her to fail, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. She still needed me, even if she couldn't admit it. And in that quiet knowledge, I found the beginning of my revenge. Not a loud, vengeful act, but a slow, deliberate retreat that would force her to see the empty spaces I once filled. I stopped reminding her about rent payments and deadlines. I let the car insurance lapse without a word, knowing she would find out when the bill came. I didn't offer to proofread her essays or help her prepare for interviews. Each small omission was a thread I chose not to weave back into the fabric of her life. I told myself I was teaching her a lesson in self-reliance, but the truth was simpler. I was showing her what it felt like to be alone, the way she had made me feel for so long. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she chose not to see it, but I could sense the shift in her, a restlessness, a quiet panic that she tried to bury beneath a bright smile. And I waited, patient and watchful, knowing that the weight of my absence would press in on her slowly, like the hush of an approaching storm. I still said goodnight to her every evening, my voice calm and measured. I still asked how her day had been, though I no longer expected an answer. And in the silence that stretched between us, I felt the power shift in ways I never expected. I had spent so long bending myself to her needs, so long convincing myself that love meant giving until there was nothing left. Now, I was learning that there was strength in holding back, in letting her feel the consequences of her own choices. She didn't see it yet, but the balance was already tipping. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. It was almost unsettling how quickly my life adjusted to her absence, even though she was still physically here. The house seemed quieter now, every sound echoing longer in the empty spaces we once filled together. I used to think the air was heavy with her presence, the scent of her shampoo, the clatter of her hurried footsteps. But I realized it was my own hope that had thickened every room, the belief that I could always be enough for her. When I let that go, the house breathed again. I breathed again. I began to notice the small ways my life had been shaped around her. The groceries I bought, always her favorites. The way I organized the hall closet so her raincoat was easy to reach on stormy days. The careful budget I kept so I could afford the little luxuries she took for granted. Each habit had been a tether binding me to her needs, but as I let them slip away, I felt lighter, freer, as if I had been carrying someone else's life on my shoulders all these years. She didn't see it coming. At first, she was oblivious to the way the world shifted beneath her feet, too caught up in the glow of her newfound independence. She thought I was simply distracted, or maybe a little worn out. She didn't realize that I was watching her, measuring each of her choices with the quiet patience of a man who had nothing left to lose. It was in those moments of distance that I understood something important. She had always believed she was in control, but she had never learned what real control looked like. One evening, she came home in a rush, her face flushed, and her voice high with the kind of forced laughter that sounded more like a plea. She dropped her bag on the kitchen table, rummaging through it with a clumsy urgency. "Dad," she said, "do you have the money for the phone bill this month? I forgot to pay it, and they're threatening to cut it off." I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was still my daughter, still the same girl who once held my hand when she was afraid of the dark, but she was also a stranger to me now, wrapped in her own illusions. I let the silence stretch between us, long enough for her to fidget and glance away. "No," I said finally, my voice even. "You'll have to figure it out on your own." Her mouth fell open in surprise, as if she'd never considered the possibility that I might refuse. For a moment, her eyes flashed with anger, but it was fleeting, replaced almost instantly by confusion and something else, something like fear. She didn't argue. She just nodded stiffly and turned away, as if she could pretend my answer hadn't mattered. I watched her retreat to her room, the door clicking shut behind her. I could hear her moving around in there, the low murmur of her voice as she made phone calls to friends who probably wouldn't pick up. I thought of the girl she used to be, the one who had trusted me to keep her safe, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it stole my breath. But I pushed it down. She had chosen this path, and I wouldn't follow her down it any longer. That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, I let my mind wander back to the days when she was still small enough to fit in my arms. I remembered the way she used to wake me in the middle of the night, her voice trembling with nightmares. Back then, I was her protector, her refuge from every imagined monster. I never thought I'd become the monster she feared most, the man who refused to bend to her will. There's a kind of power in withholding, a quiet assertion of boundaries I didn't know I was allowed to have. I could feel it in the stillness of the house, in the way she moved around me now, cautious and uncertain. She didn't know how to navigate the world without the safety net I had woven for her. And I didn't tell her that this was deliberate, that each small refusal was a lesson I had waited too long to teach. I know some might think this was cruel, but it wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. She had built her life on the assumption that I would always be there, always ready to fix her mistakes. But life doesn't work that way, and I realized I had done her no favors by pretending it did. My revenge wasn't in the denial, it was in the revelation. I wanted her to see what she had taken for granted, to feel the weight of her own choices pressing down on her for the first time. As the days passed, I saw the cracks begin to show. She was more careful with her words, more deliberate in her gestures. The laughter she shared with her friends grew hollow, and I could see the questions in her eyes whenever she looked at me. She didn't know who I was anymore, and maybe that was the point. I wasn't the man she could mold to her whims. I was the man she had pushed away, and now I was showing her what that meant. I didn't say these things out loud, of course. Some truths are too raw to share, even with the people you once loved more than yourself. But in the silence between us, I knew she felt them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to satisfaction. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew into a quiet, steady gulf. There was no shouting, No slammed doors, no theatrical scenes of teenage rebellion. Just the silence that had always been there, now made visible in the way we avoided each other's eyes. She moved through the house like a guest, careful and polite, as if she were afraid to disturb the air around us. I let her have that space, even though every inch of it had been built by my hands. I didn't miss the little ways she tested my resolve. The way she lingered in the kitchen when I came home from work, hoping I might ask her about her day. The half-hearted questions she posed, as if fishing for an invitation back into my good graces. Each time, I answered in calm, measured tones. Never cruel, but never indulgent either. I didn't offer her the comfort she had once expected from me so easily. I let her feel the weight of her choices in every careful word I didn't say. Sometimes, I wondered if I was being too hard. If maybe I was letting my own pain write the script of her life. But then I would remember the texts, the way she had laughed at me with her friends, and the memories would twist like a knife in my chest. No, I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. Finally honest in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. She had chosen to mock the life I built for her, and now she had to learn how to stand without it. She tried to find comfort elsewhere. I saw it in the way she threw herself into those friendships, clinging to people who only saw the bright surface of her life. She thought she could outrun the emptiness by filling it with new faces and new distractions. But I knew the truth. Those friends wouldn't catch her when she fell. They didn't see the small cracks that had always been there, the cracks she thought she could hide behind her easy laughter and practiced smiles. One night, I came home to find her sitting in the living room, the light from her phone casting a cold glow on her face. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching mine for something, maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness. I offered her a polite nod and walked past her without a word. I heard her breath hitch, a small, sharp sound, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. She needed to feel that I was no longer her safety net, that the man who had once moved heaven and earth for her had learned how to let go. In the quiet of my room that night, I lay in bed and let the weight of it all settle over me. I thought of the years I had spent shaping my life around hers, of the thousand small kindnesses she had never seen, of the love I had offered so freely. I thought of how she had taken it all for granted, and how that had been my doing as much as hers. I had taught her to expect my devotion without question, had taught her that my needs didn't matter, and now I was teaching her something new, that even the most patient hearts have limits. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen again, her hair still damp from the shower. She looked tired, the bright energy that had once filled her movements replaced by a wary caution. "Dad," she said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I felt the old instinct rise up in me, to pull her close, to tell her it didn't matter, that I would always be there. But I didn't. I looked at her the way you look at someone you once loved deeply, but who had become a stranger. "I know," I said simply, and then I turned back to my coffee, the conversation over before it had even begun. She didn't push it. She didn't try to argue or beg. She just nodded and left for her classes, her shoulders hunched against a world that was finally starting to feel less forgiving. I watched her go and felt a strange ache in my chest. Not regret, exactly, but a quiet mourning for the girl she used to be. I knew she would find her way eventually, but it wouldn't be with my help. That was the part of the lesson I had to let her learn on her own. Each day, I could see the understanding settling in her eyes. The knowledge that the man she had mocked and dismissed was no longer hers to lean on. And each day, I felt my own sense of self returning, like a tide that had been held back for far too long. I was still her father, but I was also a man with his own worth, his own boundaries. She was learning that, and in that quiet, deliberate distance, I found the revenge I hadn't known I was seeking. It wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. And as I watched her navigate the world she had once taken for granted, I knew that balance was finally mine. By the time summer turned the air thick and heavy, the distance between us had become a fixture in our lives, a quiet, mutual understanding that neither of us dared to name. The house felt both emptier and fuller for it. Emptier of the easy conversations we once shared, fuller of the weight of everything left unsaid. I could see the strain in the small lines that had formed around her eyes, the restless way she moved through the rooms, as if she no longer belonged in them. I understood that feeling better than I cared to admit. There was a kind of poetry in the way we circled each other now, like two ghosts haunting the same quiet spaces. She still tried, in small ways, to close the gap, offering to help with the dishes, asking if I needed anything from the store. But each offer felt like a performance, a careful calculation rather than genuine warmth. I accepted her gestures with a polite nod, never unkind, but never inviting her in. She didn't understand, not fully, how the years had taught me to stop expecting anything real in return. I found myself thinking more and more about the choices I had made to become this man. The way I had given up the life I once imagined for the sake of a daughter who had grown up to see me as a burden. The way I had silenced my own needs because I thought that was what fathers did. In those long, quiet evenings, I realized that what I had called love had often been fear. Fear of losing her, fear of not being enough, fear of what it would mean to stand alone. But as I watched her now, struggling to find her footing without the safety net I had always offered, I felt that fear melt away. She was learning to survive, and so was I. One afternoon, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of unpaid bills spread out in front of her. Her head was bowed, her fingers tracing the edges of each envelope like she was trying to find some secret path through them. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. The same girl who used to beg me to fix her broken toys now faced a world that didn't care how lost she felt. And I let her. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew that some lessons couldn't be taught with gentle words. She looked up at me then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Dad," she said, her voice a trembling whisper, "I don't know what to do." The honesty in her voice startled me. It was the first real crack in her armor, the first time she'd let me see the girl beneath the bright smile and easy laughter. For a moment, I wanted to give her the answer she was looking for. I wanted to tell her that it was all going to be all right, that I would take care of everything like I always had. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I walked over to the table and rested my hand on the back of the chair, my voice calm and even. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're stronger than you think." She stared at me, her mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came out. She just nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her own responsibilities. I turned away then, giving her the space to find her own answers, to learn the quiet resilience that I had spent years trying to hide from her. That night, I lay in bed and thought about the man I had become. I realized that I no longer felt the need to justify my choices to her or to myself. The revenge I had once imagined, some grand, cinematic reckoning, had never really been about her. It was about me. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away too freely, the small pieces of my soul I had traded for a daughter's smile that had long since faded. She didn't know it yet, but she was learning the same lesson. Each bill she paid, each decision she made without my guidance, was another step towards the woman she would have to become. And in the quiet of those long, sleepless nights, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, she would find her own strength in the echo of my absence. There was a kind of poetry in that, too, the way our lives had shifted to make room for the truth we had both tried so hard to ignore. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The steady, quiet certainty that I was finally whole again. By the time autumn returned and the leaves fell in rustling gold, the shape of our lives had settled into a quiet symmetry. My daughter still lived in the same house as I did, but the world we shared had been irrevocably changed. She had learned to move through it with cautious grace, no longer assuming that I would be there to steady her when she stumbled. And I had learned to let her find her own footing, even when it hurt to watch her falter. There were still moments, fleeting and fragile, when the old patterns tried to return. I would see her lost in thought at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping out a silent rhythm against her coffee cup, and the urge would rise up in me to ask her what was wrong. But I swallowed it down because I knew the answers she needed weren't mine to give. She had to find them herself. That was the final lesson I had to teach her, the one I had been too afraid to share when she was small. I don't think she ever fully understood what I had taken from her, or why I had done it. To her, it must have felt like abandonment, a betrayal of the promises I had once made so easily. And maybe, in some ways, it was. But it was also a reckoning. She had seen me as a relic, a man stuck in a past she didn't want to inherit. I had shown her what it meant to stand alone in the world she thought she understood so well. I had shown her that even the quietest heart has its breaking point. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the light turned the sky to fire, she knocked softly on my door. I looked up from the book I was reading and saw her standing there, her eyes searching mine. "Dad," she said, her voice a careful whisper, "I think I'm going to move out. I found a place with a friend. I think it's time." For a moment, I felt the weight of her words settle over me like a final, deliberate choice. My first instinct was to offer her help, money for rent, advice about leases, anything to make the transition easier. But I didn't. Instead, I closed my book and nodded slowly. "I think it's time, too," I said, my voice steady. She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if she were seeing the man I had become in the long, quiet months of our slow parting. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or understanding, but she didn't try to close the distance between us. She just nodded once and turned away, leaving me with the soft echo of her footsteps and the knowledge that this was how it had to be. When she left a week later, the house felt both impossibly empty and impossibly full. I walked through the rooms and touched the things she had left behind: a chipped coffee mug, a sweater folded neatly on her bed, and felt the finality of it settle in my bones. I didn't cry. There was no need for tears. This was the resolution I had been working towards all along. In the weeks that followed, I began to reclaim the small pieces of my life I had given up for her. I started writing again, just small notes at first, scribbled thoughts and half-finished ideas, but they felt like mine in a way nothing else had in years. I took long walks in the early mornings, breathing in the crisp air and feeling the ground solid beneath my feet. I cooked for myself, simple meals that tasted better because they were mine alone. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights when the silence of the house pressed in on me so hard it felt like a second skin, nights when I wondered if I had done the right thing by letting her go. But in those moments of doubt, I reminded myself that this wasn't about punishment. It was about balance, about finally seeing myself as more than just her father, about learning to stand on my own in the same way I had demanded she learn to stand on hers. I haven't spoken to her in weeks, and I don't know when or if she'll reach out again. I think she will, eventually. Life has a way of turning us back towards the people we thought we could live without. And when she does, I'll be here. Not as the man she once mocked, not as the father who tried too hard to be everything for her, but as myself, whole, quiet, and stronger for everything I had to let go. In the end, my revenge wasn't about watching her fail. It was about showing her that I was never as weak as she thought, that my love wasn't a burden to be cast aside. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away too easily. And in that quiet triumph, I found something I had been searching for all along: peace. If you felt the power of this slow burn revenge, or saw a piece of yourself in this journey, I'd love to hear from you. Like, comment, and subscribe to keep these stories alive. I've got plenty more to share. See you soon in our next story.